My guest on today's episode is Molly Bestge. Molly founded a company called Cultivate 21, which is a nationally recognized professional development company where she works with educators to incorporate project-based learning, STEAM and STEM education, and then also curriculum around 21st century skills. I met Molly a number of years ago. We couldn't recall our exact origin story, how we came to know each other, but when I first met her and found out about this business of hers, I knew I wanted to have her on this talk show. I didn't even have the talk show then, and I knew I wanted to work with her. And we've been in each other's lives ever since. I love what she is bringing to schools. I love that she has a heart for rural America. She grew up in a tiny town. We call it a village. She moved her kids to a small school district on purpose. And so we talk about some of the benefits of raising your kids in a small school. And we spend some time talking about how do we encourage our children from home to do some of the things that she's trying to incorporate in the school. Also, how do we advocate for our kids when you live in a really small town, you know all the teachers, you know all the staff, and you don't want to be adversarial, but you want to really partner with the school. It's a beautiful conversation. Molly is so smart, and I can't wait to hear what you all think. So enjoy this chat with me and my friend Molly.
All right. So we're sitting here with Molly. My friend Molly, you own a business called Cultivate 21. And so since the topic of our episode today is education in rural America, and I mean, that was why obviously I wanted to bring you on, because you have this business, you live in a very small town, you grew up in a very small town. So you get what that small town dynamic looks like. And I think, of course, education, as a mom of 3 kids, 2 of which are in school, I constantly have concerns and worries, and not necessarily about how our school system's doing things. I mean, I always say, like in these episodes, like nobody is going to get hurt in the process of recording these episodes. Like it's not to call out what people are doing wrong or right or anything, but it's just as a topic. I think it's something that I sometimes worry about as a mom. So why don't you start out by just telling us a little bit about Cultivate 21, how you started it, what you do, and then we'll go from there.
Well, wonderful. Well, I own Cultivate 21, and Cultivate 21 is a professional development company where I go all over the United States and work with school districts of all different sizes and help them understand how to best implement STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math. And then I also talk about STEAM with the arts in it.
Right.
And then also project-based learning and 21st century skills. And I think my biggest passion are the 21st century skills. And those are the critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, and making sure that that is a part of our standard curriculum, because those pieces are what really, I think, drive workforce readiness. So I talk about, we want kids to be college, career, life ready. And now a lot of conversation is around this idea of choice ready as well.
Yep.
So making sure that I'm equipping teachers to be able to do that work with kids. My tagline is learn, grow, innovate. And so I work really hard with teachers to learn that pedagogy, those things that really work well with kids, so that they feel like they're growing their own professional learning space, so that they have the confidence to go into their classroom and innovate education for the future.
Okay, fantastic. So there's a few things that I would love to for us to expand on a little bit based on what you just said. Okay, so they're called 21st century learning skills, right? First question for you to we can talk about a little bit is, why do you think those are more critical now? I mean, why are they're called 21st century skills, right? So when you think about, the teachers or anybody that is part of a faculty that might watch this episode, why is it that now there's so much emphasis on this? Why isn't what they've always done going to work going forward? What's the impetus? What's the catalyst? What's the thing that's making this more important now than ever before?
Well, honestly, the beginning of what we call the 4 C's started from conversations with business industry. And business industry,
go figure,
right, had had some, I wouldn't say they were concerns, but levels of understanding about what kinds of employees they needed for the future.
Mm-hmm.
And those conversations ended up kind of getting us to these ideas of those 4 C's. I don't, they're called 21st century skills, but really I think about those 4 as the critical employability skills that
Right.
all kids need before they graduate. And if I really should have been doing like a longitudinal study of all of my conversations with business industry over the last 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I ask a couple of questions almost every single time I talk to a business industry partner or a potential business industry partner. I ask them, so what are you looking for in an employee? And almost always it comes back to those skills of being collaborative, being a good communicator, being a creative problem solver, so that creativity and problem solving kind of coming together, and then having that space of not having to be managed, so that you're given a task and
Self-direction.
to do what you need to do to succeed. And so that project management space is something that comes up a lot. Well, that is, they can all be kind of parsed into like each of those 4 skills, the critical thinking, the communication, the collaboration, and the creativity. And there's been a lot of work across the nation, and I think the world, about those skills and how those skills and why those skills are important for us to embed in the curriculum. I always say that really you can't engage students unless you have good content, and then you use the 4 C's to engage them.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like content
Right.
plus 4 C's equals engagement. And when we have those relevant ways to apply the skills through the content, that creates that opportunity for kids to really engage in a full way, and not be, not have it be this arbitrary thing. It's not just learning for the sake of learning. It's learning in a relevant and authentic way.
Right. So what I love, I remember when I don't remember how you and I first came into each other's worlds. I honestly cannot remember our origin story, Molly. I don't remember. But
some of it was through my dad.
Right, it might have been your dad. But so speaking of your dad took a Dale Carnegie course from me back when I was a facilitator. And so the only reason I bring up Dale Carnegie at all is because, in that role, I was one of the people bringing that kind of training to the workforce. So these business leaders that you and, that the educational world, as you're kind of building out what comes next in education, you're having all these conversations. These business leaders would contract with Dale Carnegie to bring this kind of training to their teams. So I remember when you first were telling me about your business, I'll never forget how it was just like, well, this is pretty sorely needed. Like in my head, I just thought it's in order. So, all of these businesses that are hiring us to do this kind of training with their teams, had they had some foundation of it when they were in high school, man, would the world look different. And it's not like Dale Carnegie training and all the other corporate development, they're never going to go away entirely, because until this becomes just like everybody does it, until it becomes standard, it's going to take some time to fill those gaps. But I think, I don't know how you feel about this, but from my standpoint as well, interpersonal skills just continue to tank.
Mm-hmm.
And it really is obviously the onset of technology and device use, and that you can communicate so easily without ever having to learn the social nuances involved in face-to-face communication. I just think I love the work that you do. And I hope, I'm just going to say it right now. Like, I hope that I see your face walking around Oaks because you're working with my school. Like, this is, yeah. And this is not like my underhanded backdoor way to get you in here, but because I'm pretty vocal about it. But I think that this isn't just something that I think rural communities need at all. Mm-hmm. But from where I sit, what do you think about the fact that this shows up? And even more present ways in a small town, because you moved to your small town, you are not just in your job and you're not just in your family. You're in your church and then you're in your community, and there's this interwoven, these skills are so important for community growth and just sustainability for small towns, I think. Like this is the core of how small towns function and thrive.
I agree with you completely, and I think that when we look at communication skills in general, I think there are spaces within every unit that teachers work with kids to include that authentic communication piece.
Right.
When I'm working with schools around STEM, there's an engineering design process that I use that I say it drives the bus, and it really does when it comes to STEM project-based learning. And what's so cool about the engineering design process is that those skills, those communication skills, the research skills, all of those are embedded within the engineering design process. And the second to the last step, step 7, is communication. And I emphasize how very important it is, especially if we're talking about engineering, that you can have all these great ideas, but if you can't figure out how to share those ideas in a way that your target audience needs to hear them, then it's all for naught. And so when I worked with my students, it was a lot about, teaching them how to have poise in front of an audience and to know your audience and to have asked questions about that audience before you present to them. As you're researching, to know, like, do I have the empathy behind the solution for this problem? Do I understand why I'm solving this problem? That, and you can't do that without being able to truly, ask a good question, take it to your heart, figure out how to solve that in a meaningful way, and then be able to share your solution. And I think in a small community, you're right that communication is a tightly woven, space. Like when we moved to our small town, I had to learn a lot about who was connected to whom.
Right.
And my joke was that I really wished that everyone walked around with a name tag that had the family tree.
Right.
Because the family tree, like we communicate in lots of ways, but some of it is like your familial, like, connection, right? Especially in a small town. Well, we don't have any, a familial connection to anyone here. We moved here because we wanted to be like people, because we are like people. As last week, Lakers.
Yeah, the Lakers.
But we wanted to be permanent Lakers, and it worked out. It just worked out that this is where we are, and we were lucky that there were 2 small communities that have a great school for our kids to experience and be a part of a smaller community. But the communication, I have been challenged by the communication within our 2 little towns, because I'm very open. I'm very forward. I ask questions. And I think what's hard is people sometimes take questions and they think that questions are a dig.
Right.
Or a challenge to whatever, status quo or whatever. Well, yes, in some ways questions are a challenge to the status quo. And I don't ever regret any question that I have asked, because I need to get clear so that I can better understand the situation, right? But I think people have finally figured out that I'm about kids first.
Right.
They're figuring it out, that I'm about kids first, and I will ask the right questions to always move things in a positive direction, and sometimes, sometimes people may be offended because I ask a pretty loaded question. But I feel that from the questions comes that understanding and empathy.
Right. It's basically you living out what you're trying to teach these students to do, or the teachers, really, because you work mostly with teachers to help students, right? Because you're in a professional development capacity now. But I think that is, I mean, I have experienced that personally many times. And I think the whole thing is to always remind ourselves, and I've talked about this in multiple ways on the talk show here, is just always remembering where those people are coming from, or trying your best to see where they're coming from, even if you don't agree. Because there are going to be people, especially in a smaller community, well, not everywhere, but it just seems more maybe present or obvious in a small town, where people are going to hold really tight to tradition. Mm-hmm. They're going to hold really tight to the way things have always been done because they feel comfortable there, right? Mm-hmm. So anytime we ask a question that they take as challenging or confronting, yeah, it's going to get people's hackles up a little bit, right? And we just need to be prepared to say, okay, I'm just here to learn. I'm asking a question because I don't understand. But I think it's really cool that you're very obviously living that out every day. And those are then examples that you can take to these students as you're working with them to help them see, like, this is actually a skill that never goes away. It's not like you learn it and then you don't actually, this isn't arbitrary at all. You used the word arbitrary before when you're talking about these 4 C's aren't, oh, and then we need to do these. It's like these 4 things are interwoven into the way that we move through the world, right? Like, regardless of what you do for a living, these are 4 really important things. So, okay, so I love all of this. I think one thing I would love to get your take on as a teacher, not in your school system, because something that you and I have talked about a bit is just how to advocate for your child with the school in a way that's partner driven. Because I will say this, I will go on record as saying this, I haven't always agreed with every single little thing our school has done since my 2 young children have been in the school system. But I don't take it to the streets and bitch and complain about it. I refuse to do that. I want to be a partner with my school system in educating my children. That's how I want to be. Yet I don't always know 100% how to do that. I mean, that's me being honest, right? So what's your experience, with that? And by the way, also when you answer this, how small is your town? I would love to hear that. But maybe for some of the moms that are listening, what advice or counsel or wisdom or thoughts can you share at all about how to go about that in a way that the school will not see you as an adversary, especially if that's not your intention? I'm not talking to the women and the people that want to fight the school, because that is not where I'm coming from. You can do that all day long. It is not hard to point out problems, people. It is much, much harder to point out ideas and ways to move forward, right? So I'm not talking about being adversarial, but I'm talking about people that have good intentions, but maybe don't feel equipped. So that's super loaded, but
that's all right.
Anything we can talk about with this, I just think it's important because our kids, you don't want to move to a small town and feel like your kids are going to be limited.
Right.
In choice. Right? In choice or in quality and breadth and depth of education. I mean, that's not what you want to feel.
No. And let's just kind of give you some background. So yes. we moved from a larger community to a smaller community. And that was very intentional because there were some important positives about being in a rural, smaller community for our kids. And both my husband and I grew up in smaller communities. He lived in, I would consider, like a town, and I lived in a really small town.
You lived in a village.
Village? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Because I grew up with like 300 people in my town, and
right.
That's counting the dogs and the cats,
Right.
But my husband, lived in a town where there was like a Palmyra and,
Yep.
like a larger community. So I didn't have any of that. And when our kids were progressing through elementary school, we started to, feel that they were having to make choices so early about what their passions were. And we just were really like, we just want them to experience things.
Any of it.
Experience it. Whatever they wanted to do, we wanted them to be able to have that opportunity and have the opportunity to lead, and choose, make those choices, in a way that made sense for them. But in our larger community, they were having to make those choices so very early. Like with sports, if you weren't like really good by like 4th grade, you could like
not ever play. Like
kiss that goodbye. And when our son kind of said that to us, we asked whether he wanted to take another basketball camp, and he just said, well, why would I want to do that? I'm not going to get to play anyway. Whoa. So that kind of like, that was one of the things that was like, well, we know we don't have like a Michael Jordan here, but if he enjoys it, then we want him to be able to enjoy it. Right. So we had conversations, and we had originally thought that we were going to go to a different community, but it didn't quite work out. And then God laid this wonderful house in our path, and we visited the school and knew that it was a good space for our kids and a good move. And we have not regretted it for a second. It's really been wonderful for our kids. They have really been able to make those, take those opportunities to try new things. Certain things they've loved, certain things they haven't, which is fine. We have a great summer rec program. They're just like lots of wonderful things that we just have been so blessed to have had the opportunity for our kids to experience. But to get back to,
can I say one thing? Can I say one thing about that too? I hopefully won't take you off track, but I feel like that's something. I don't know if your small town is a little bit obsessed with sports. No. If you feel like you see that, our community is quite sports driven. I would say, and what you and I are talking about right now is something that, again, and this is an encouragement maybe to the women that'll watch this episode if you've got children. I feel sometimes like we lose sight of the fact that sports are a placeholder for any kind of character development. That is, I get that it's also, it's physical, and you can learn about winning and losing, and you learn about striving. And I think striving for excellence is always very important. Right. I'm not a huge fan of everybody gets a trophy. Like, that's not how I feel about the world. But at the same time, I feel like you don't win just for the sake of winning either. If you are a jerk to your teammates, and you know what I mean? Like, sports gives you this opportunity to learn how to collaborate, how to communicate, how to use critical thinking. Oh, look at that, how to be creative. Like, it's a placeholder. So you could get that same thing in drama.
Right.
You could get that same thing in being a mathlete. I don't care, like, so I want to just say that, because I think sometimes we get really short-sighted about what this high school experience, especially high school, like my kids aren't in high school yet, right, but what it really means, and it's like, all this is an opportunity for them to develop skills that they take out and beyond all of this. I don't know. That's how I feel about it. And that's why small towns, I do love the fact that it's just like, you want to try it? Like my son, we're going to national archery in May to Kentucky, fantastic. Which is crazy. Like, it's his first year doing archery, and we have a very good archery program here, and it's just really cool. And he gets this really cool experience, right? I promise you he would not be on the national archery team in a bigger community, or at least it's pretty unlikely, So anyway, I just felt like that was important to say, because you're calling attention to something that I think is so easy to get confused in your brain.
Right. And I look at opportunities to lead as
socializing.
Opportunities to lead is everything, so
right.
you know, our school has a really strong music program. We have a great drama program. You know, Sam had the opportunity to be on the robotics team this year, and it was
Which is
just
really
so
cool.
fantastic. They placed very, very well in the regional tournament, and we were just so excited for them. You know, there are just these, you know, spaces for leadership and student council. You know, all these things. You know, and
Right.
we have a philanthropy and youth, you know, that happens in our school. And so there are just so many spaces. And then of course our kids are in 4-H as well. And I was a 4-Her, and I just love
Me
how
too.
the 4 Cs and project-based learning is all, you know, that's what 4-H is all about. So all these things, you know, that happen within the smaller community, you're right, because they just have this like space where it's okay to try it, you know, and it's okay to like it or not like it, you know, like, oh, no big deal, you know.
Right.
Everyone's going to find their lane, you know, everyone's going to find where their gifts are, and that's the beauty of it, you know. You know, I think it was harder for Sam to move to the smaller community, friend wise, because he had already like established some really wonderful friendships in
Right.
Fargo and West Fargo. But he's developed some really great friendships here. Now Mara was smaller when we moved here.
Yeah.
So she has that group of friends, and they're quirky little awesome people, you know, that just really love each other the way that they are. And I love that. As parents though, like I feel like we have an amazing opportunity to be our kids advocate in a lot of ways. And I think the first thing is you have to be interested in what is going on in your school. There are communities all over rural America where the school board meets there one time a month, and there is not a single person from the community at a board meeting. And to me, that's a travesty, because that is
I think I can tell you that's pretty much the case.
right.
Like you'll be there if you're on an agenda item
Right.
for a reason, like if you have something you're bringing to the school board or whatever, but I don't think our school board meetings are attended by the public.
And to me, that is like the perfect opportunity to go and hear about the business of the school. Most of the time, there are opportunities for presentations where, you know, different teachers or different students come and celebrate things that are going on in the school, and those are like amazing, you know. So like last night, we had a school board meeting in Lake Park, Audubon, and we had two of the teachers. One was sharing about progress on a STEAM lab kind of room that we're going to have in our building. And then the other teacher shared about the progress of the kids in the construction trades class, all the great skills that they've learned throughout the year in his program. And so highlighting those wonderful things, you know, not everyone has the opportunity to hear about the great things that are going on in our schools, and we need to be willing to give up the hour and a half to go and hear about the workings of the school, as well as like keep up with what's on the agenda and the decisions that are being made by that governing board. So you know, I think that's a first step. But another thing is to be involved, like booster club, parent teacher, PTO, you know, being involved and asking questions, you know, going to our elementary PTO meetings. I don't get there all the time because of my work schedule, but our gal is really great about making sure that we know the agendas ahead of time, and if we have questions, we can ask questions. And she's just been a fantastic leader. So it's good because we know like what are the next things that are going to be happening in our elementary school, or you know, there are spaces where if you want to be involved, you can. And for me, those spaces of involvement were how I've gotten to know people in my small community.
Right.
And that's good. You know, some great friendships have come from just showing up at a booster club meeting or showing up at a PTO meeting and asking good questions. So I think that that's a really good first step, is to like be willing to be involved. I'm not saying that, you know, you have to be involved in everything, you know, that would just be like insanity, but like figuring out, you know, like, would you be willing to go and serve concessions a couple of times, you know, for the football games? Well, yeah. Or, oh, we sell a lot of our school apparel at football games. It's kind of weird. But sure, I'll come and help sell those. You know, great. You know, get to talk to people. You know, they ask me who I am, and I'll tell them who I am. I'm Sam and Mara's mom, because that's the way that I.
Yeah, right. You're not connected in any other way, right? That family tree, they wouldn't know what to do with you. Cool.
You know, but it's through those opportunities, you know, that I've gotten to know people, and then also our church too. You know,
sure.
The work of our church, that's really been helpful. But you know, those people know that I care about the school, and so if they have questions, they ask me, and then you know, I can ask the question of the school in a positive way. It's, you know, I never want anything to be negative. When I ask a question, it's just seeking understanding and empathy.
Right. So what other things, you know, as we're kind of wrapping up our conversation, I think if this is something that we're interested in having, I mean, how do we start this conversation if it hasn't kind of been started? And something else we had talked about before we hit record was you wanted to talk a little bit about the focus on the trades.
Yes.
And I think that's a great conversation. So in our small town, we are really fortunate. We have what's called the Southeast Career and Technology Center, where amazing programming is offered. That it's supplements, you know, supplement what happens in kind of core curriculum at the school. And yeah, so let's just talk about that a little bit, because again, I think the whole idea is to empower people to think differently, maybe about what their kids need. Again, advocacy for us, a partnership with the school is important to me. And I think the last thing for me, when I think about, I'm a parent, I'm not a teacher, I'm not in the school system, it's how do I affect change if I want to be a voice for positive growth forward, you know? And especially when it comes to these things that are maybe less about the core curriculum and they are about the trades, which is just so important. So let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I'm a big advocate for career technical education and the importance of providing kids the opportunity to explore some of those careers in high school before they, you know, head off, you know, wherever they're going after high school. And you know, I think the story of, you know, the perfect life in the United States has always been, well, you grow up, you go to college, you get married, you have kids, but you know, that is, and you have this great career. Well, that is, you know, a story that we're being told. And instead, I feel like we need to equip kids with the ability to write their own story, like to figure out what's right for them. Okay. And when I say what's right for them, not every kid should be going to a 4-year college.
Right.
If that's not where their gifts are. And I think that we need to address the skills gap that's happening right now in the United States, especially, and in rural America as well. There's this huge gap in skilled trades, and kids, if they can figure out that that's something that, you know, makes them happy, they can write their own ticket. If they want to be a plumber, an electrician, construction worker, construction management. I mean, there, you know, tons of different trades that are seeking good employees. And that's where the 21st century skills, I feel, really get back to having a strong work ethic and teaching kids to have that strong work ethic, to not give up, to persevere, to problem solved. Nothing bothers me more than a kid who just like, well, I don't know the answer to that, or I give up. I don't know. And instead we need to teach kids that feel, well, I don't know yet.
Right.
That one word, yet.
Right.
I don't know yet. So now what am I going to do to creatively problem solve to figure out what the solution is to that problem? And that's where I feel like there are so many hands-on opportunities in career tech education that allow kids to grapple with the 4 C's and with those 21st century skills that are sometimes, lost to content in the regular ed classroom. And
Right.
that's really where I feel. And I believe that in the rural setting, we need to advocate for the career tech education classes to be offered in our schools. And when I say career tech education, I'm also saying computer science.
Mhm.
I'm also saying engineering. I'm also saying, making sure that kids know how to use tools in a shop. Yes, right? Because all of those things really, are important as life skills.
Right.
But not everyone's going to choose to be in building construction trades. That's fine. And other kids are going to choose to be in the ag program and learn about the plant science behind that so that they can be, great helpers on the farm and help make decisions, with that. And I think that breadth and depth that we could provide through career tech education is really, really important. And I think that they sometimes, those programs are some of the first programs to get cut because they're expensive, right?
Right.
Well, we need to look at this space of employability. And if we are really going to make sure that our communities thrive and grow, we have to have the right workers that are ready to do that work. And I know my husband, he has had some issues too with like filling the workforce need and, getting kids who are willing to work,
Right.
to work,
Willing, period.
willing to work,
Mhm.
and and not being afraid of hard work. And I think that there's a really wonderful space that we have in rural America where that work ethic, we haven't lost it.
Mhm.
And I think that space, that's part of the reason why we love where we live, is that we're really seeing that, emphasized in the education that our kids are getting in our school district. And so it's something that I'm very, very grateful for every
Right.
single day. And the opportunities.
Right. So two things that are popping into my mind. I think one of the things that you're highlighting throughout this entire discussion is the difference between a fixed and a growth mindset.
Right.
Because when you and I were together in Detroit Lakes and we sat down with that table of young ladies from the technical college there, which I loved that opportunity so much. It was wonderful. I shared with them, and I'll share this here with you too, but like, I was a good test taker, right? So under kind of that traditional idea of what learning is, it's passing tests and it's getting good grades. I got very good grades.
Right.
But when I became an entrepreneur 5 years ago, almost 6 years ago now, that isn't learning. I didn't know how to grapple. The word grapple is one of my favorite words in this whole context of this discussion. It was just like, so I don't know the answer. Well, now what?
Mm-hmm.
Figuring out how to be resourceful. That's where critical thinking comes into play, and creativity together, right? Problem solving is just grappling and knowing that it doesn't mean that you're not smart or that you're not equipped or that you're not right for the job because you don't know what you're doing. So I really feel like I didn't 100% learn that skill. And this isn't a fault of my school. I mean, I think it's just, it was different, and now it really is, to me, like when I'm working on a project right now, potentially for Oaks, I don't know what the hell I'm doing. I have no idea. And that feeling is very uncomfortable for me still. It's not like you ever just go, oh, I love that I don't know. I mean, it doesn't feel that good, right? But the grappling is saying, okay, I don't know yet. Because I think this is something adults need. Most of the adults I know can't just hang out in the space of not knowing the answer, right? So I just feel like that's a huge part of it, is saying, I don't have to know it because my knowledge of this thing isn't fixed.
Right.
Like I can get better at it, right? I can get better at it if I choose to apply myself.
One of the my favorite 21st century skills is that being okay with ambiguity.
Yeah. And I'm still kind of not that great at that. I struggle with it.
And I think at certain times I'm better at it, and certain times I'm not so good at it. And I think that it's one of those things where we have to model those, spaces. And I've gotten really good about, saying when I'm in that space, or like, yeah, I really don't know yet, like how to go about solving this problem. It's that space of teaching kids the way to be a creative problem solver.
Right.
And I think what is the hardest part is that they don't necessarily always have the best models.
Yeah.
About how to be a creative problem solver.
That was going to be my kind of follow-up question to this, is I think biggest takeaway, like to kind of wrap up this whole discussion, is as parents, how can we instill, because I think work ethic is a huge deal. Mm-hmm. Like you said, I have one of those children that my oldest son would potentially in some respects drive you crazy. So he has pockets of it where he can grapple, like archery. 100% was one of those things. He was hitting himself in the arm. He has black and blue, crying, hated it. He'd probably be very embarrassed that I'm just telling everybody that's going to watch this that, but he was very upset. Like, I don't want to do this anymore. And we talked to his coach and we worked on it. And now he's going to national archery. Right now, again, it's not about the goal or the outcome. It's about the journey and what you learn along the way. Right. But then there's other things where, like, if he doesn't know it, or so I think sometimes it's intellectual things. If he feels like he should be smart enough to figure it out, he's just like, I give up.
Right.
So as his mother, I get very frustrated with this because I see flashes of myself, and I mean, he gets this 100% from me. So when you think about this idea of instilling in our kids a strong work ethic, the ability to grapple, being comfortable with ambiguity, maybe it is just growth mindset in general. Do you have even a couple of ideas of things that we can do at home to help establish this in them? Whether or not our schools get on board with the 4 C's and step, right? Because that's maybe less of a, not battle, but less of a charge that we can make, but thinking about what do we do about it at home?
Yeah. And I believe that it's naming the skill and naming when you notice, I appreciate your critical thinking in solving that problem, or wow, we need to stop and communicate our feelings right now in order for us to, figure out what we're going to do next. Like those models are so very important as parents. And I do think that if we think about those 4 C's, critical thinking, communication, collaboration, and creativity, how can we provide opportunities for kids to stretch those 21st century skill muscles? There are going to be spaces where they get frustrated, but we need to figure out how to help them through that, but not do it for them. There's a difference. I always say that kids need a little bit of struggle. They need a little struggle in order for them to learn. And if we think about our own learning as adults, it's through the struggle that we see the better result at the end. And I think there have been some talk about like this idea of like snowplow parenting, or instead of it being helicopter parents, is this like where you're clearing out all the snow and there are no bumps whatsoever. And I think that as parents, we need to not be that snowplow. We need to be parents who are willing to let kids do a little failing, because through failure, I think some of the best learning happens. Actually, brain research does say that a failure helps you to learn more than a success. And so, opportunities for kids to, fall literally or fall figuratively, allow them to see strengths and growth areas. And notice I didn't say weakness.
Right.
Because it's a growth area. So, I may not be good at this one thing, but I have the potential to grow that skill every single time.
Right.
And so if you're noticing that maybe we need to, work through how to persevere through a challenge, which also is a 21st century skill in critical thinking, right?
Yep.
That perseverance space, modeling it first, or, saying, well, let's do this together first so that they can do it alone the next time. It's like Vygotsky's zone of proximal development. You kind of like teach them, you set a goal just a little bit higher than you think the kid is going to be able, that they think they can do it. And eventually, really what always happens is that the kid always goes way further than they ever thought they could, because they persevered through the challenge. And I just think that we have gotten, as parents, and we're all guilty of it, we just want it to be smooth.
We swoop in and we save them from whatever they're struggling with.
It's hard. It's really hard to step back and let them grapple, right? Let them do those things. And I think that again, it comes back to us modeling some of that, the wording, the growth mindset phrases, the idea of using the word yet, I think that is so important. Well, oh, you don't know it yet. Let's do some learning. What are some resources that you can access to learn how to do that? Right now, kids have so many resources available to them. Like, if I would have had YouTube when I was younger, like, oh my gosh, like, if you can't do something, all you have to do is look for a YouTube video and watch that, and then suddenly you can like fix something, like, oh, this is kind of cool. Right?
My husband and I fixed our washing machine.
Yeah.
We replaced a part on our washing machine, which I never would have done. I mean, ever. Like, that's like way out of my wheelhouse, right? Like 100%. Like, mechanical is not my gift area. I'll be honest. It's a growth opportunity, an area of growth for me. And I YouTubed it, and it was right there. It was the exact same model, the whole thing. And I was just like, I mean, it's really funny, such a lame example, but I was like, look at us. We're so smart, like, so I think to give your kids that is such a serious sense of satisfaction. Like, when you start something and you legitimately do not know up from down about what you are doing, and you get through it and you figure it out, I mean, it is so rewarding. And what's so funny is that none of us ever feel that way when everything goes smooth.
Right.
You don't recognize that it's going smooth because there's nothing to even make you aware of it. Like, the struggle, no matter what it is, the challenge, when you overcome it, is when you're just like, that's when you feel good about yourself. That's where pride of your work ethic, all that stuff comes in. I mean, and I think about how applicable all of this is to being an entrepreneur. Well, I mean, it's like, it's exact, like, one-for-one similarities, and this isn't just about, I mean, so I guess the other thing, like, as we're talking about this, we're thinking about the women and the role models that are going to be watching this. Like, think about the last time you gave up on something because you didn't know what you were doing. And what did that show? Not just your children, but yourself, to stretch yourself, to dig deep and to ask questions and to look for help and to, be resourceful. I mean, that's what this is all about.
Exactly. And I do think that also to realize that your resources are within your community as well. In a small town, once you get to know your town, you start to see whose gifts can serve, help you, and that their gifts can serve you and you can serve them. And I think that too many times we we don't want to communicate beyond our own little like self. And there are so many spaces of growth and learning that can happen just by being open to the opportunity to learn.
Right.
And learn from the people in your community as well. And I think going back to the school opportunity too, is that if you have something that you know would be valuable, I would hope you would share that with, with your school.
Right.
Like, I think one of the things that teachers, I always share with teachers is that business industry and entrepreneurs, they want to be involved in the school. They just haven't been asked yet.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's like the field of dreams, if you build it, they will come. Well,
Right.
no, if you ask them, they will come. And
Right.
if they can't come, they'll find somebody else to come because they're honored to be asked to be a part of education. And I think that that's that space where we have to, as community members, be willing to say yes.
Mm-hmm.
To help grow the future and to ask questions of those kids. Like if you're asked to be on a panel for project-based learning to let the kids share their projects, be ready to ask hard questions, because we don't want questions that are, oh, it's so lovely, like I don't want lovely questions. I want kids to have to stand
Right.
and think on their feet, to answer a difficult question. We don't want to forget about those opportunities as well. I just want to encourage moms, dads, grandmas, grandpas, to be willing to, first of all, build a relationship with the teacher. That's number one, right?
Right.
And let that teacher know what your gifts are. Because if there's a space where you could come in and help with something, do it. Yeah. Because that's going to help grow those 21st century skills as well through a different model, not just the teacher.
Yeah. Right.
So, yeah, lots of things.
Something else you're speaking to. See, so many little tangents, but it's all good. I think since coming back to my hometown, when I was growing up here and I was in high school, I did not think about things like I do now, right? Because I was a child, I was a young person. But now I think a lot about the fact that there is such a huge opportunity for, especially in a small community, for the business community and the school to partner.
Yes.
And again, to create these opportunities for students to get that real world relevant experience, but also just reminding everybody of how much we need each other. Mm-hmm. And again, it was like, I became a member of the chamber, started working with the chamber, and I started to see things very differently. Like the school isn't only something you worry about if you have kids in it.
Right.
And so I think there's so many opportunities for more of these kinds of discussions where people are taking an active role because they understand the critical role that it plays in the community. It's not just about educating children, because frankly, we do a really great job, I think, of encouraging all of our kids to fly. And then we never tell them how they could come back. Mm-hmm. We invest in them to leave, and then we don't explain, like, this is what this could look like for you here.
Right.
And a better partnership between the business community and the school would at least accomplish that in part, besides a focused effort to do so. But
right. And I do believe that business industry and all business, entrepreneurs, everything, that we have that opportunity to connect. Mm-hmm. And connecting business industry with education is a big passion of mine, and making sure that we do see how it's a mutually beneficial relationship.
Right.
The school needs the business industry people to help them to know what they need to create in employees. Mm-hmm. But the school needs to have that relationship with the employer to know how to do it. Right. And if we don't have the conversations and we don't communicate with one another, you're living in these silos, and instead of building bridges, I guess, and
Right.
teaching
Right.
kids how to see beyond just taking that test at the end of next week. It's that space of growth for everyone.
Well, you are a beautiful, shining example of somebody that is, not you created your own business. Like, and this is, I'll just say this for anybody watching too, it would have been very easy just to stay in the role that you were in. I mean, it's in the sense of security and comfort and knowing exactly what was going to come at you most days, right? With some variation, because teaching is not that routine. But instead, you saw a need to fill, and you stepped outside, and you probably felt very grapply throughout the past 4 years. I'm sure there have been many moments where you're like, oh my gosh, like, what am I doing? I don't know what I'm doing. But you figure it out and you move forward. And I'm so thankful to know you, and I'm so thankful for the work that you're doing. And it's important not just for our students, but for the rest of us as we grow and we develop, to never lose sight of how important these things are. It's not just about students. I mean, I know your work specifically is, but all of us need to remember how important these things are, because it's what makes the world completely go round, no matter how big your world is, big or small.
Thank you for this opportunity to talk about my passions.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Do you ever look around your small town and feel like there's zero inspiration to be found? Well, I can totally relate to that. And yet I really, truly believe that the best way to stay inspired is by choosing to find little, easy ways to get those hits of inspiration. And that's why there's a whole section in the Small Town Survival Kit that includes wallpaper that I created with motivational, inspirational messages on them, including the books, the apps I use, and the podcasts that I listen to that make me feel like I'm not so small just because of my small environment. So grab the link and get your copy, because it really is all about the little things.